Welcome everyone to the Meet the World panel discussion organized by the National Center for Writing. I'm Joyce, the author of Land of Sand and Song and other titles, and here with me are two award-winning authors, Eva Wong Nava, author of The House of Little Sisters and other titles, and Richard Lambert, author of The Wolf Road and other titles. So before we begin, let's have Eva and Richard do a quick introduction of yourselves and your books, and any special tidbit of information that you would like us to know about you. Richard, would you like to start?
Thanks, Joyce. So I'm Richard, and I've had 3 novels published. The Wolf Road was the first one, which is definitely YA, and then 2 fantasy novels for, I would say, ages sort of 11 to 14, a bit younger, but not quite middle grade, kind of in between. And yeah, those are the 3 that I've had published, and they're all kind of adventures with suspense and drama, I suppose. Yeah, that's kind of my YA writing. I do other kinds of writing, but that's my YA stuff.
And Eva?
Hi, thank you, Joyce, for moderating this. So I'm Eva, or Eva, doesn't matter. I answer to both. I am a children's book author, primarily a picture book author, actually. So The House of Little Sisters is my debut YA. It was published by Penguin Random House Southeast Asia, part of the Penguin Random House group, which is they're based in Singapore. Published in 2022, I want to say. It's been a while back. So I'm primarily a picture book author. And that is really my happy space. So when I write for YA, I tend to kind of go a bit deeper and darker.
Cool. Thank you both for being here today. So we're covering a wide range of topics today, so let's just dive in. Let's start by talking about our author journey. So what drew you to writing for young adults specifically? Because I personally love capturing those pivotal moments when a character is like coming of age and discovering themselves, but I'm curious how you both feel about writing for young adults.
I like young adult novels as well, as a reader, because I also like that those pivotal moments that you're talking, the coming of age, the discovery of self, and the discovery of the world for that young adult. So I guess I'm kind of like haven't really left my young adulthood. I'm still discovering the world through books. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I think so. When I embarked on on my journey as an author, as I said, I write primarily picture books. I came across an article about the trading of born servant girls in Southeast Asia, and I felt really compelled to write about this, to write the story. Right, I couldn't do it obviously for picture books. I couldn't also do it for middle grade. It's too young an age, so I had to go up to YA because of the themes that this book was exploring. So that started my kind of YA journey, and I have another book which I have not yet submitted to my agent, but I'm working on it.
Exciting.
I really like YA novels. I think I remember reading at that age when I was a teen and just really loving reading. It was one of my favorite things. And I've gone on, I read quite broadly, literary. I quite like genre fiction as a reader now, as an adult, like crime, all kinds of different genres. But I still read YA just as a reader, and that was really actually where it started, thinking I wanted to do something like that I just enjoyed reading them because often they have really compelling plots and they're fast paced and like that pivotal moment in the character's life, a person's life. And that discovery of the world, as you say, there is that, that sort of often it's conflict, isn't it? Because you come in to meet the world as that teenage character, or a teenage character does, and you meet the world, and there's great change there. So I think it was sort of like coming to it as a reader and liking that genre, and as much as, and then I started writing, and the character happened to be a teenager. I thought I was writing a literary novel, but The Wolf Road was the first one, and I was drawing on all my reading as a YA, using lots of motifs and plot devices that came from my reading, I think. Yeah.
So as you mentioned, the books that you read when you were a teenager and now as well. So I'm just curious how your respective backgrounds and literary diet has kind of influenced the kind of stories that you write for young adults.
For me, I think I was born in Singapore. I came to England as a young adult, actually. I mean, as an adult, but a young one. And I've been here since, so it's been decades and decades. If I told you, you'll be able to guess my age. But, I've been here a long time. And, but even when I was growing up in Singapore, my diet of diet of books were all Anglo-European, so published in the UK or the USA, but mostly in the UK, actually. Um, so reading those books, I guess, also fed into my um, imagination and into my process as an author. Um, I mean, The House of Little Sisters is set primarily in Southeast Asia, in British Malaya. I must say that I've not read growing up a YA. I think YA didn't even exist as an age group when I was a teenager, right? Um, so I didn't actually read any YA that had anyone of like me in it, or anyone that lived in history like me in it. If I mean, I read all sorts. And like Richard, like you, I'm a very broad reader. I like genre. I like literary. I read commercial. I just read. Right. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers your question as such, Joyce, but
Yeah, I mean, I suppose my reading history is, I mean, it's like mainly British. Well, yeah. I hadn't thought of that actually, but yeah, the YA category didn't really exist back then, and it was mainly children's. But there were some that were like definitely sort of the main characters were a bit older, but only one or two actually. So that definitely affects, but it was British rather than American as well. Sort of 70s, 80s, but then I've gone on beyond that. I've just kept reading them, and then and reading YA, and then reading YA more broadly. But mainly American and British, I suppose. So definitely those, it's quite, I would say probably it's probably quite culturally limited, is the background that I've had, but I think it's getting wider as I've got more older. Yeah.
We'll get to the diversity part of the interview later on, but for now, I'm also curious like how your cultural context, because I'm a born and bred Singaporean. Richard is British, and Eva straddles both cultures. So I'm kind of curious how your cultural contexts kind of shape the themes and the issues that you, as YA authors, tackle. Do you feel like these might differ significantly between different countries, different regions, or different cultures?
I think the YA I tend to read, I tend to read a lot of East and Southeast Asian or Asian themed YA, only because it's not that I don't read any other ones. I do, but I kind of feel I'm making up for childhood that was missing in books. I think I think that's how I approach it, I guess. And whether these themes have kind of fed into my writing. Um, I mean, I can't. I've only written one YA at the moment. I'm working on another one, and my other one is also kind of Asian themed. It's things I'm trying to explore, right? And I write historical fiction, and of course I love reading historical fiction because I feel that there are things in the past that still affect us today. And if we didn't go back a little, a kind of a 2 steps back or 10 steps back, then we wouldn't quite understand why we're still being affected by these things today, right? So I try to explore that in my books or in my stories.
Could I ask, because I thought that was just so interesting, just like coming at it from a Western perspective and not knowing that culture at all. That was just really, that historical element was really interesting to me in The House of Little Sisters.
Thank you.
Is that, so you is that, and that's something that sounds like that's what you're interested in, like you're doing that in the next one as well.
Yeah, similarly. I was living in Singapore between 2013 and 2020. So I have actually been in the UK since the 1990s. So my diet of books haven't really changed, right? But they've always been British. I mean, then American authored books also were in the mix. Um, then when I went back to live in Singapore with my family in those 7 years that I was there, I discovered so many things that I didn't know existed then. And one of the things I discovered was this Muay Thai, a problem. And the British government, the British administrations, British administrators had even called it that. They called it the Muay Thai problem because it was a problem to them. They tried to eradicate it because of the Anti-Slavery or Slavery Abolition Act in 1830 something, I think. But it didn't work out for them in Asia. So that really intrigued me, and I wanted to explore that. So and I think it wasn't a book that was picked up in the Western publishing circuit because it were themes that they didn't know about. It was a history that they didn't know about. So it got picked up by Penguin Random House Southeast Asia, who had just started when they acquired the book. They had just started their operations in Singapore.
I mean, because I can't really compare, because I just don't know the Singaporean YA scene really to know what the different themes, in comparison. But the ones that in my first one, I wasn't really thinking of. I think mainly I knew that it was about the character, and I knew it was about a family that, and about grief and about coming to terms with bereavement. And I knew I wanted to set it sort of now in a contemporary setting. And there were bits that came in, to do with school bullying, and also to do with bit of there's a little bit of one of the characters quite politicized. So there were elements that came in from like just what the world around, the contemporary world, but not massively. And then in the next two, which were fantasy novels, especially in the third one, that was one I wrote during lockdown, and it was much more political, and it's probably a bit, well, my publisher thought it was a bit too on the nose, just too making the points too obvious. But that was definitely kind of, because it's in this fantasy world and there's some political elements in this fantasy world, but I wanted that to be a parallel to sort of concerns that were, for me personally, I suppose, in British culture in the 2022 or 2023. So that definitely had those. I was drawing on lots of devices that I'd come across from books I'd read, British YA or other novels. So structurally, I was using my background as a reader, and then I was kind of responding in that one much more directly, I felt, to what was going on.
It's interesting that you mentioned the politics of it. I mean, when I set out to write The House of Little Sisters, I was curious because when I went to live in Singapore between those years, 2013 and 2020, I saw how the society there it was different from the society here in terms of, in Singapore, families were very dependent on their home help, right? Home help is also cheaper, relatively cheaper compared to, what we were paying here in the UK. And it was something that struck me, right? That when I went to the supermarket, that the helper were the ones doing the shopping, and mostly with the children. I mean, obviously the families in Singapore are like a lot of families in London too. There are two-parent working families, but they're more dependent on the home help. And so it struck me. And I remember one day being in one of the cold storage or something in the supermarket and thinking, why is it like that, right? And I went and I dug up the history. I went and it was a why is it like that question that led me to find out, or to wanting to find out more. And I actually found the history, that there was a link to it.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, comes from asking questions like why and what if. So I'm also very curious how you balance out the themes that, some of the themes that you both write are pretty heavy. So I was wondering how you kind of craft an engaging story that would resonate with young adult readers, while also getting your point through these themes.
For me, I think, just personally, I think I've tried to start, tried to start with the characters, and that if the reader cares about the character, then, that you want to follow the characters, and that you'll, and that the kind of issues, I hope, I'm not saying that I do it, but ideally, that they kind of only part of it, mainly it's how the character is in relation to the world. And the world is also, the world is lots of things, but including like politics and other. So I suppose, and then I'm thinking about, and I do kind of plot and structure my books quite carefully. Like before, I'm quite an architectural writer. I know some writers or get more organic, and that they don't know what's going to happen. But I tend to like plot it and plan it bit by bit, and try to have I aim to, whether it works or not, it's another matter, to have, like cliffhangers and suspense and peril and danger, and need the reader needing to read on. Those are the things that I try to make it engaging for the reader. I'm not really thinking so much like that this person is a teenager, and is it this? It's more like the character, That's what I aim to do. But yeah,
I think I got that. That comes up quite clearly in your in the book, your book. I think characters are very important. Actually, they make the story what the story is. Just picking up on your point, because The House of Little Sisters is a dual perspective novel. It actually started as a single perspective. It was only May's story. But then there was another voice in my head that wouldn't leave me alone, and it was actually the older servant's voice, Wan's voice, and it kept interrupting May's dialogue, and this was all living in my head. So it's actually the most intense story I've ever written of all the stories I've written. I mean, I've written for adults before, flash fiction and all that, but this is really it was the most intense story I've ever written. The two main characters were really in my head. So, now that you've mentioned characters, I'm remembering again. So it became a dual perspective novel. And I think the dual perspective serves the novel quite well, because you're hearing it from a younger servant who is actually enslaved, and the older servant who is also quite enslaved, if you think about it, but she's actually paid, right? And it gives the world a structure. The structure of the world is reflected in these two dual perspectives, because in 1930s Singapore there were paid servants and enslaved servants.
So adding on to that, actually, how do you create relatable and engaging protagonists, in your respective genres, like be it in 1930s Malaya or the Land of Shadows? How do you create characters that, will engage the reader, but also make the themes come across universal?
For me, it was the research. I mean, my because it's a YA historical fiction. my story is backed by the research that I did. And when I discovered in an ordinance called the 1932 Muay Thai Ordinance, which exists in a small book filled with other ordinances, right? And the Muay Thai Ordinance was one of them. And there were these words that were used because, this was the British government trying to regulate or put a fence around this trading of these bond servant girls. They couldn't exactly make it illegal, so they had to find a way to say, okay, you can, I suppose, have servants, but you need to house them. You need to feed them. You need to pay them, right? Because they were not paid before, and there were words like, they were exchanged as gifts. Often these servant girls were, like one family would say, okay, um, you I'll take your servant girl because you owe me a debt, right? So these were the words that jumped out at me from the ordinance, and I was so shocked. I was so naive, actually. I felt that, after reading that, I thought, oh my goodness, these things were still happening in 1930s, in the 1930s. Um, and it actually went on. It existed, or this trading of the way servants are being treated in Asia and Southeast Asia went on, still goes on today in some parts, and this went on till the 80s, right? So for me, it was just startling, staggering, actually.
Yeah, I felt when I was reading your novel, that household and just like the rhythms of the daily life and the detail, like the cooking. There's so much lovely detail and the ingredients and how they cook and the places the places they occupy in the house, like where the different people sleep. And so for me, that was like, it really embedded the characters as like, these people are living a real life. And yeah, I really like the dual perspective, the different characters and how they kind of saw things, like the older woman, how she kind of she was sort of almost accommodated the exploitation. She kind of like lived with it and kind of almost accepted it, even though she knew it was wrong. And so that sort of contrast with the heroine, it was just really, that there were so many, there's parts, so I think that when you say about research, because that's something I did a lot of for the Wolf book, I did a lot of research about the place and went to these different places. I don't know that region, I know it a little bit, but I went and visited there and did lots of research. So yeah, I find research and like trying to make the people, thinking of them actually in a real place. Yes, so for me, that's one of the things that makes a character more real. And yeah, I try and like feel what I kind of do a bit of a sort of like an actor or something. I try and pretend I sort of see it in my head, like I'm in that scene, and what would I feel if I were there? So that's kind of what I try to do, Yeah.
I suppose our readers would tend to do that, right? You identify with certain characters, and yeah. So that's my hope, anyway.
So I presume
Yeah.
both of you are character-driven authors.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
start with
I definitely am. Even in my picture books,
Hmm.
even when I write picture books, my picture books are often led by my characters.
So how do you go about crafting your character? Do you start with a specific trait? Do you simplify them and, have one of your character represent something and your antagonist represent something else? Is that how you build your characters, or how do you craft them?
Oh, great question. I think for the House of Little Sisters, I would say that me represents, bond servant girls, and one represents the older, wiser, but ambivalent woman. Right, like as Richard had correctly picked up, she's ambivalent, but she's only ambivalent because sh- she's absorbed all that patriarchy around her, right? So she is representative of that, I suppose, I guess, in my head. It came across to you as well that she is ambivalent, and I'm glad that, you got it.
I think I used to be more schematic with how, in the first one, I was definitely thinking like, so you've got our hero and he's going to be like this and he does this. So it was a bit more simplistic. But as I'm writing more, I'm trying more and more to, like, before I even start writing, to picture the characters in my head more and to write scenes that don't appear in the book, and then to think about their relationships more. So kind of like just to make them a bit more physically, or a bit more real. Before I know, I kind of roughly know what the story is now, but I don't set out to write until I sort of like try to live with the characters a bit more. Yeah, but that's a sort of like a bit of a process for me, I think, as a writer, trying to develop that. But I think that's what that's what I partly that's what I respond to in a book, if I love the character.
We mentioned, diversity earlier on. So we back in the 90s, I don't think the young adult scene was as bustling as it is now. And I mean, it's for the better, right? There are so many more voices now. And a lot of, marginalized voices are coming to the forefront, which is great. How do you think the scene has changed since you started reading young adult back in the day? I mean, I guess back in the day for me, would be like Catcher in the Rye. That was actually my first young adult book that I read as a kid, and I guess Little Women. I'm not sure if that counts as young adult,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good one, actually.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So those were the ones that I
Yeah.
read as a kid. Well, I read it when I was like 10 years old, so not really a young adult yet, but yeah, I mean, there's so many voices now, and I was just wondering how you feel about the scene. What else you're anticipating in the future for young adults fiction.
I think young adult will never go away. I mean, it's an age category in publishing that will stick forever and ever. But obviously, there's also another one called new adult, which is which is lesser heard of.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah,
I should have.
yeah, yeah, and so the young adult is this young adult. Obviously, the character is usually between like 6, yeah, 17, 18 years old, or 16, let's just say 16 average, and they are discovering themselves first, maybe first love, and first love with touch, maybe, like first physical love, maybe, then whatever, first they're discovering their world. They have this perspective of the world, and then something changes, and they discover that, oh, that perspective is not correct, and then they discover themselves, right? Whereas I think new adult is, from what I understand, is that young adult has grown up a little bit. They're in their 20s, right? Maybe they're starting a first serious relationship, their first serious job, right? Um, and they discover themselves again. But it's another coming of age. I think that every stage of our lives is a coming of age. Just that publishing is very fixated on, oh, you're 16, that you're coming of age, right? Because you're still coming of age at 30, at 40, at 50, right? Because you're a different person one decade later. So you're discovering what you are in that decade, right? But I don't know. But let's go back to YA then. Um, uh, I think it will stay. And I think that publishers are not going to stop publishing YA at any time. Um, they are, I mean, especially in the UK, uh, they are wanting to get more and more diverse in this, or they have a mind to be more diverse, right? Uh, but I think it's at the end of it, it's also, publishing is also a business. So sometimes, the editor may see a potential in a story, and the sales team says, okay, how can we sell this? Who's going to buy it, right? Like, so going back to The House of Little Sisters, it wasn't picked up here, not even after it was published by Penguin Random House Southeast Asia. I was told that the UK in-house, Penguin Random House UK, didn't want to pick that up because I think they didn't know how to market it. It's a history that is not that is not taught in schools, for example. Because here we are learning about British history, of course, World War I, World War II, maybe some colonial history. Like India, basically, is a bigger colonial history that we learn about here in the UK, not Southeast Asia.
I mean, I'm not very. I don't try very hard to keep up. I should keep up to date more with what's being published and chosen to be published by the publishers. I'm aware of it. Like I go to the bookshop, Waterstones here, the big chain bookshops, and see what's being published and read a few, but not many. But I see that it changes. I don't really keep right up to the minute with it. I know it is. I can see it's becoming more diverse, and I think that's a good thing. That it's a broader. It's just giving a broader view of what reality is, which I think is, in my view, good. And yeah, I think that's, and I agree that I think the publishers are more aware of it, especially in the last, say, 4 or 5 years, that they have to be more engaged with it. So I think there's an impetus for them to want to do that. And there are more voices being heard, which is good. I mean, I've noticed in my writing, not almost by accident, that I'm bringing in, slightly more diverse viewpoints, I think. Yeah, but in a sort of like slightly tangential way. Like in my fantasy novel, the third fantasy novel I was published, I had there's quite a few characters who are like refugees. There's a character who's half an angel and half a human, which I realized as I was writing it, that sort of, it had a lot of, then when I would sort of see conversations about trans movement and things, I would think, oh gosh, it's sort of, there's a chime there, or I wonder if that's partly where it, that sort of having characters who are not one thing, or that sort of ambiguity. So I just thought, I think I'm responding a little to the change in the way the British culture is changing slightly, so I think my writing is changing, although I'm not trying to, not consciously thinking what's going to be the next big thing and try and do it. But yeah, that's kind of my own personal take on it. Yeah,
I totally get that because, when I first started writing, I realized a lot of my characters were very whitewashed because I was writing to cater to, the Anglo-Saxon market. And it's only because, the rise of, more diverse books in the past decade or so that I decided to really embrace my cultural background and my roots and write more Asian fantasy, for instance, or books that are actually set in Singapore instead of some generic setting that, I tried to make more universal in order to reach my readers. But when you're trying to write for everyone, you're actually writing for no one. So, so I try to kind of narrow it down and make the sense of place stronger in my writing. So I think, this trend in publishing has really helped a lot of authors, writers come to terms with our own culture. And I think this is a good direction that we're taking. Hopefully it will continue or flourish further. So Richard, you mentioned that you've kind of incorporated more diversity in your books subconsciously. But for Eva, your books actually focus quite heavily on Asian representation, Chinese representation. So what other than having your books not picked up by let's say UK publishing, what other specific challenges or triumphs have you faced in writing your kind of stories?
That's a great question. It's quite a thought-provoking one. So in the UK, I am known here as a advocate for um, diversity and representation of East and Southeast Asian culture, heritage, and people. You know, um, it's quite. We're still, and if I may say so, we're still quite very colonial here. We're divided into different racial groups. For example, Black, Asian, minority ethnic, which is a acronym at the ME acronym that doesn't include Black and Asian, right? And so publishing sees us this way as well, unfortunately. you know so when publishing talks about diversity representation, they will look at like, oh, how many percentage of books are of black characters or by Black people, how many percentage by Asian authors, Asian being in from South Asia, right? And someone like me who is British, East Asian, but from Singapore, I fall between all the cracks, you know. um, and so when I'm commissioned to write books by publishers, they usually ask me to write books that are of East Asian, which is China, usually representation, for which I am ethnic Chinese, but I'm also Singaporean, I'm also Southeast Asian. So the world is so much more hyphenated, but I don't think publishing has caught on. Yet they're trying. I mean, it's not to say they're not trying. They are trying. Like the recent CLPE report that just published, that was just published this morning, I read on the bookseller, has shown that and I wish they would stop calling it trend, because it should never be a trend. Diversity and representation is a must, not a trend, right? Because we live in this diverse world, whether we're racially diverse, culturally diverse, gender diverse, neurodiverse, so many types of diversity, but publishing is still thinking in the dominant, right? Probably will get into trouble saying this, but anyway, it is what it is, and we work with what we have to work with. So these are the challenges for me, I guess, as someone who straddles all these identities and all these spaces, and trying to kind of get my voice heard. Because as an East and Southeast Asian British, Britain, I am quite a small number here. We were less, I think we're less than even 1%. I don't know how many percent we are, but we're tiny compared to the Black communities and the South Asian communities, right? So I kind of go out there, I guess. This is what I do. I don't know when I'll be cancelled, but I'll do my best.
So what advice would both of you give to writers who are trying to break into the YA market and also write the stories of their heart, whether they're in Singapore, the UK, or anywhere else around the world?
I think write what, well, not that I know, but I think it's really important to write what you want to write, what you believe in. I think that from having written tried to write lots of different things, when my heart is really in it, I really want to write it. I think it's what I do is what I write, what I produce is better. And also it's like, it's going to be difficult to get published anyway. I mean, I'm writing things now that are not getting published, and they'll probably just carry on like that. Some will, some won't. So I wouldn't want to sort of place that. I mean, if I was giving advice to a writer, someone who's starting, I would say just do what you want to do, and then because they can't take that away from you. There, if you write something for the market, it might not get published, and then you haven't got anything anyway. But if you do it and you love it and you're really proud of it, I think that's more important in a way.
Absolutely, I echo that. I just write. If you want to write, if you're someone who, writing is like a beast, isn't it? It just possesses you. and if you are a writer, that beast lives in you. It's very hard to exorcise it. So write what you want. Just write whatever it is that makes you happy. And don't write to trends, like never, because if it's a trend, it will change, right? So I mean, I don't know, not that I have a lot of advice, but I've just always written. And like Joyce, when I started out writing, um, I had characters that were named Michael, Angela. They were not called May or Wan or any other Asian name, right? But that was because I was reading books with children who were named, with English, very British names, right? As I said earlier. But then when I grew up, I thought, okay, but my world is not this way. My family is not like that. Not all my cousins have English or British names or anglicized names, right? So then I I matured as a writer as well. So you will mature as a writer. I mean, every book I write, I hope will be better than the next one.
Me too. Me too. I feel the same. Yeah.
Are there any other genres or themes that you're hoping to explore for your next book?
Oh, I'm writing. I'm writing lots of different things at the moment. Actually, I'm writing a book. I'm writing a long short story about a ghost story about a ghostly hand,
Oh,
and
good.
Interesting.
yeah. And then I'm writing about. I've been planning a YA book, and I want to have some sharks in it. Whether it will or not, I don't know. But I want to write about sharks next.
About shark.
Yeah.
I think I'm at the moment, I'm really, really enjoying retelling East Asian folk tales. I did a lot of research behind that, and it resulted in 18 short stories of that, East and Southeast East Asian folk tales, myths, and legends. So I realized I had so much fun retelling these for a younger audience, the middle grade, and I want to continue doing that for an even younger audience, for picture books, actually.
Could I ask what you said you're working on the YA one? Is that all? You don't want to talk about it, maybe if you're in the middle of it. But is that what historical setting is that?
Oh, it will be post-war British Malaya, yeah, and it will deal with the war history in that part of the world. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Another research-heavy book.
Oh, yeah. I enjoy the research, actually. If it never resulted in a book, right? I've learned something from it. So
I was gonna ask, like, what do you hope your next story would kind of what do you hope that your reader will take away from your next piece of work? If you want to share more about it.
the story, I hope, the characters, then they at least, and that they will learn. Well, I hate to say this, but I learned potted history through reading books, right? I read a lot of historical fiction because I'm learning about a certain place, certain period. So I enjoy that, and I think because as much as I like research, sometimes research, you read all these academic books are very boring, dry, So I thought I think fiction is a great way to kind of weave that bit of academic stuff into, right? So I think I hope that's what it is. I mean, it doesn't have to be historical fiction or anything. Like I've learned so much from reading your book, Richard, about the place, right? And about, because place is also a character. We could have another panel discussion on this, you know, place as character. So it's all, books. I learn from books, actually. So I think that's the takeaway for me, for any of my readers.
Yeah. No, when I read your book this last week, the place was really, I got a very strong sense of that, like the compound of the house with the yard and the gates and the different parts of and the streets around, like the herbalist and where they go to get the food, where her boyfriend is, yeah,
Oh, the Suntress. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
this like this little part of the city. It was yeah, got a very strong sense of place.
thank
Yeah,
you.
I with my I really, because when I really like read, I have, it's like a real pleasure to read for me as a reader. So I think what I would want a reader to experience is like to enjoy, if I could do it successfully, write a book that like a reader would pick up and like just become absorbed in, fall into, and like love reading. I'm quite happy just for it to be an entertainment, but like a rich entertainment, not just a fast food, but it's a really good delicious meal, but that they want to yeah, but something that's pleasurable, I think is that's what I would hope. Yeah.
That actually takes me to my final question. Like, how do you think we as writers can engage young adult readers now that we're in an age of social media and there's so many distractions and everyone would rather, well, not everyone, but a lot of teenagers now would spend more time on their phone than they would with a book. How do you think we as writers can engage them again?
I mean, I've been doing a lot of and this is not directly related to your, well, sort of to your question, but I've been doing a lot of school visits the last year or so, and there was one I did, and it was for a whole year group, so it was about 100 kids, and the festival, it was at a literary festival, and the literary festival actually bought, rather than the children having to buy the book if they wanted it, the literary festival actually bought every child in that school, in that year group, like, so it was 100 books of my book,
Wow.
and gave them to them. And so that was a state school, and a lot of them were not big readers according to the teacher, but it was just, that seemed I know it's a little thing, but there were a lot of children there. And then when I did the talk and the reading and got them doing some writing exercises as well, writing their own stories, there was and they were about 13, these kids. There was an awful lot, so a bit younger perhaps than YA, but there was an awful lot of people who were not that engaged in writing, who sort of came away from it or reading, came away from it like a little more enthused at the possibility of what writing might be and what reading might be. I know that's not, that's slightly different from, a book being read from somebody just going into a bookshop or a library. But I found that really, when I can see it, if I can get to the school and get the children writing or something, that really helps.
I mean, I think author visits are important. It's good for just to pick up where you started, because I think there are students who read. I mean, there are people. I mean, children read anyway, right? They start out having to read because it's compulsory for a start. Then some might pick it up, some may love it more, others may not, right? And when an author visits a school, what they get to see, I guess, it's that there is a person behind the book, because usually they don't really, sometimes they read, they don't even know who the author is, unless that author is famous or celebrity, or it's a bit anathema here, but um they don't know who the author is. So when they see the author, they realize, oh, there is a person behind this book, there is a person behind the stories, and they get to ask the author, like, oh, why did you write the character this way, or like whatever questions we are kind of exploring here today, right? And for that author to be able to answer that is something special to a child, I think. And they don't forget. And I think that it's important, budgets allowing, of course, that authors get asked to go to school as much as possible. I obviously haven't answered your question. I don't know. It's what do I want?
How do you think we as writers can engage young adult readers? But actually, I think you both did answer the question. I think you mentioned that it starts at the school level to engage the readers directly in your school visits, which is a great way of thinking about it. I never really saw it that way. Because I write for older young adults, so a lot of schools prefer middle grade books, which are more accessible to their students. So I never really did author visits or author talks at school. But yeah, hearing from both of you who have done author visits in schools, that it's kind of reframed the way I look at author visits. And it's so interesting how, you know, as an author, you don't realize how much impact you might have on the readers, especially young readers, and how you can kind of shape their interest in reading. So that's a very interesting way to look at things. And I might go on author visits now that, you both have shared your
What
experiences.
What do you think, Joyce, about reaching like YA readers?
Yeah.
Do you think there's ways to do it?
Well, I think, I have, interacted with my YA readers before, and I think a lot of them, they do have, um, a small ambition, like a small ember of ambition, or aspiration to be a writer, but they don't think that it's possible. So sometimes when they come to me, they ask me, is it possible to be a writer in Singapore? Is it a viable profession? And I think I realized that they actually have a lot of questions and they have a lot of interest in writing and also reading because you can't be a writer without being a reader. But a lot of them just don't have that encouragement, I guess, or maybe the a more encouraging environment for them to pursue this passion of theirs. So I think engaging young adults at festivals, at schools, is also a great way to kind of stoke their little ember and make it into a great fire.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We do have a lot of school programs in the UK where we want not to encourage our children to read for pleasure, right? Because a lot of our children are really not reading for pleasure because they're reading for exams, for example, or yeah. So we kind of want to. There's a lot of there are a lot of programs here, like the Open University Reading for Pleasure um, initiative and other literary festivals also picking up on that theme. You know, so I kind of do hope that this continues. Yeah.
I guess the three of us write in very different genres, actually. I write Asian fantasy. Richard, you write YA, contemporary, and fantasy. And also, Eva, you write picture books and also, historical YA. So I guess what the question would be, what are some of the universal themes across all these different genres that you think will resonate with young adult readers? Because, we don't a lot of the readers, they don't really, they're still experimenting with the kind of books that they like to read. So some of them might be more drawn to historical fiction. Some of them might be more drawn to a more contemporary voice. But I think having universal themes kind of helps to, you know, um, make one reader cross over into another genre. So what do you think are some of the universal themes that can help with the crossover appeal?
I think YA in general help as a age category helps readers to explore, like we said already earlier, the coming of age. Right? They're coming of a certain age, they're growing up, they're maturing, and these are universal themes. Whatever the genre of the novel is, historical fiction, contemporary fantasy, they're all in YA, isn't it? As far as I've observed. Love is another theme. Uh, Always, you can't. Look at the rise of romantasy, for example. It's not that, in fantasy there's never love, right? There always is, and yeah, and how that teen character navigates love in all its form, I guess. Then it all depends on what other themes. Like for me, my personal, uh, to me, a personally important theme is to explore and explode patriarchy. So, as a woman, I think about patriarchy a lot because we are still living in patriarchy, right? So, themes like that, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. While you were talking, I was thinking, as we were saying at the beginning about coming of age stories, and I suppose because it's such a big moment in a human being's life that it's so fundamental. Like, I guess that sort of transition from, being part, they don't have to be part of a family, but from family to being an individual,
Oh yeah,
or that's such a huge thing, and sort of it's dramatic, and it's psychologically or psychically, it's dramatic, I think.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it can be on it, yeah, like it can be fantasy or contemporary, but if that theme is is still, I think for anybody, you don't have to be a YA reader to find that theme gripping. And yeah, romance, love, and especially first love, I think, in the YA
Oh
books,
yes.
that
Yeah.
because it's so much more acute, isn't it? That feeling of being overwhelmed by it, and the pain of it finishing or perishing. Um,
Yeah.
um, um, those are some. I mean, I reread The Hobbit. I mean, that's a very British, adventure story. But that story about a character, kind of way he kind of grows up in that one. There's a coming of age story in a way. Uh, that was I loved that, even though it's an adventure story. My one that I wrote, the first one, The Wolf Road, is about grief. I think that can be
Mm.
I suppose, like, yeah, those
Oh yeah.
huge human themes, I suppose. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I
Uh,
guess the human condition, isn't it? Yeah, the human condition. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
what I love about YA is that a lot of YA authors actually don't shy away from these themes. They actually do explore them and make them relatable and accessible to the young adults, even though, they haven't, a lot of them may not have experienced those themes yet. They kind of understand what it's about, and a lot of them can relate to that, even though, their experience is still quite limited. One of the themes that I do like to explore is also, as Richard mentioned, the coming of age and finding their own independence. Yeah, so for my book, it was about this girl who has to leave her tribe in order to kind of save it. So she has to find her way around the world after being protected by her tribe, for most of her formative years, her growing up years. So she has to decide what her destiny is, whether how much control she has over her life. And I think as young adults, a lot of them might start to question where they might go, what their place is in the world. I think these are some of the themes that can resonate with them as well.
did you have that, Joyce? Did you have that in mind before you started writing, that was going to be like a driver, or a bit important element, or was it like the fantasy story that?
I think it was, well, I did, like both of you, I'm also a character-driven writer. So I start with the character. I wanted her to be expelled from her tribe and find herself, find her place in the world. But I didn't actually think about the theme before before I wrote the book. Usually the theme comes to me in retrospect, and
Mm.
yeah, and I kind of I just follow the characters where they want to go and where they are meant to go. And in creating the art, in writing the books, I realized this is her character arc. This is how she's meant to grow. Like she's finding her place in the world. She's realizing she doesn't have as much agency as she thought she did. And sometimes, things are just destined, but she's trying to fight against that. So I guess that was the theme that I was grappling with while I was writing my trilogy.
Yeah, I think picking up on destiny, destiny is a huge theme,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, it's fate. It's where we're going to go from here. Like, after we face all these challenges in life, right? And I think that is something that I also explore, or at least I also explored in my book. And now that you've mentioned it, yeah, made me think.
Yeah, I think your characters, the thing is, they do have agency in the sense you want to give them agency, but a lot of them are like restricted by their surroundings, by their environment, by the social cultural restrictions that they have imposed on them. And I think that's where the conflict lies. That's why your book is so juicy, in that your character is kind of fighting against these restrictions and trying to carve her own way. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. Think about it. It's true. It's finding agencies, and especially as a girl, and I mean, it took me a while as an Asian woman to find my agency. And I think that was something I explored in the House of Little Sisters.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess that is kind of all the time we have today. Thank you so much for sharing, for being so generous in sharing your thoughts. I've learned so much from both of you. Thank you for joining us for Meet the World, and many thanks to the National Center for Writing for having us. So I guess this is the end of our little session.